It is almost inevitable that each NBA season will feature huge trades in which star players are shipped off to different teams. In recent years, we've seen guys like DeMarcus Cousins, Blake Griffin, and Jimmy Butler get traded during the regular season. With that being said, here are 5 star players that I expect to be moved by this year's trade deadline. Number 1, Zach LaVine. The Chicago Bulls have been one of the most disappointing teams in the league over the past few seasons. After building a team filled with multiple young lottery picks, it was expected that the Bulls would compete for a playoff spot last season. While the team had a lot of talent, the Bulls drastically underperformed last year, finishing 11th in the East while also being one of just 8 teams to not participate in the bubble. Fast forward to this season, and the expectations were quite similar for the Bulls. While the East did get a lot stronger, many people thought that the Bulls would at least be able to compete for a spot in this year's play-in game. While it is still very early on in the season, at the making of this video, the Bulls are 2-4 and have not looked much better than they were last season. Their schedule in January looks pretty difficult, and there's a good chance that they have one of the league's worst records 5 weeks into the season. With the team not performing well, the Bulls might look to trade LaVine since he is currently their most valuable asset. I could see them pulling the trigger on this move pretty soon, just in case LaVine requests a trade and ends up lowering his trade value. While the Philadelphia 76ers would be a great fit for LaVine, I think the Orlando Magic will actually be the ones to trade for him. For the Magic, LaVine would give them the young go-to scorer that they've been looking for. Orlando has an underrated young core, and LaVine would only add to that. He would benefit greatly from playing next to great defensive players like Jonathan Isaac and Aaron Gordon, and offensively, LaVine and Fultz could become one of the most exciting young backcourts in the league. To make this move happen, the Magic would have to give up Evan Fournier, Chuma Okeke, and a future lottery-protected first-round pick. If you're Chicago, you might be able to get Cole Anthony as well, but it really depends how high Zach LaVine's trade value is. Number 2, Kyle Lowry. After having an amazing 2019-2020 season, the Raptors have gotten off to a bit of a slow start this year. Their 1-3 record has given many people indications that this team is a 6th or 7th seed at best. While time will only tell where the Raptors finish in the standings, if they're barely in the playoffs as the trade deadline approaches, I could see them moving on from Kyle Lowry. There were rumors at the start of last season that the Raptors were considering trading Lowry away, so he's definitely not a lock to stay with that team. On top of that, Lowry is in the final year of his deal, and Toronto just re-signed another guard in Fred VanVleet to a big contract this past offseason. So if the Raptors aren't looking like a contender by the trade deadline, I could see them agreeing to this trade. The Clippers would be getting a true point guard in Kyle Lowry, who would be a significant upgrade over Patrick Beverley. They'd also bring in Alec Burks to give them some bench scoring, and Alex Len to play backup center minutes. It's also worth mentioning that Lowry already has great chemistry with both Kawhi and Serge Ibaka from the championship they won together in Toronto. The Raptors would get a second-round pick from LA, 2 good young players in Zubac and Luke Kennard, as well as Patrick Beverley, a tough 3-and-D point guard that could help Toronto stay competitive in the East. For the Knicks, they'd be adding another pick to their collection, a young prospect in Terrence Mann, and they'd still have lots of cap space for the 2021 offseason since Lou Will and Patrick Patterson are both expiring contracts. Number 3, DeMar DeRozan. When the Spurs traded away Kawhi Leonard, it was clear that they were no longer a championship contender. In the 2 years that San Antonio has had DeRozan, they have been a solid team in the West, making the playoffs the first year and just missing out on the playoffs last season. The issue for DeRozan is that the Spurs do have some nice young talent on this team, meaning that it would probably be better for them to trade away DeRozan and embrace a youth movement rather than fighting for an 8th seed to only get swept in the first round. Finding a trade for DeRozan could be tough because his playstyle isn't best suited for today's NBA. Obviously, DeMar is a great player and he can lead your team to the playoffs, but there have always been questions about his three-point shot and whether or not he could play a larger role on a championship team. While it is still early, DeRozan has shot 54% from 3 through the first 5 games of the season. If DeMar continues to show that he's developed a respectable three-point shot, I could see the Brooklyn Nets making a trade for him. The Nets just lost Spencer Dinwiddie to a partially torn ACL, and they could use someone to replace him. Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot is nice, but if the Nets were offered this trade, I think they'd accept it. In the trade, they'd be giving up Dinwiddie, who will likely be out for the rest of this season, Taurean Prince, who has had a minimal role on this team, and 2 future second-round picks. The most important thing is that the Nets would still be a very deep team, and they would be able to hold on to their 2 best young players in Caris LeVert and Jarrett Allen. The Spurs would be getting an expiring contract in Trevor Ariza, a 26-year-old 3-and-D wing in Taurean Prince, and a future second-round pick as well. For the Thunder, they get another pick in the trade, and they also get Spencer Dinwiddie, who will likely accept his player option for next season, meaning that OKC will likely be able to flip him for another pick as well. Number 4, LaMarcus Aldridge. If the Spurs decide to embrace a rebuild, then LaMarcus Aldridge will likely be traded by the deadline as well. Like DeRozan, Aldridge is also on a 1-year deal, and I could only see a limited number of teams being interested in him since he is getting up there in age. Aldridge is still a guy that can score in the mid-range, and last year he even expanded his range to the 3-point line, shooting 39% on 3 attempts per game. At this point in his career, Aldridge isn't a number 1 scoring option, but he's a player that can still be very productive playing next to some good guards. With that in mind, I think the Wizards would be a great fit for Aldridge. Now, at the making of this video, the Wizards have gotten off to a terrible 1-5 start, so that being said, I only see the Wizards doing this trade if they're around 500 by the trade deadline. For this move to happen, the Spurs would have to accept a 3-team trade involving the Wizards, of course, and also the Sacramento Kings. The trade would send Robin Lopez and Thomas Bryant to the Spurs, Aldridge and Whiteside to the Wizards, and Ish Smith and a second-round pick to the Kings. For the Spurs and Kings, San Antonio would be getting a nice young center in Thomas Bryant to go along with the young guard talent that this team already has, and the Kings would bring in an expiring contract in Ish Smith as well as a future second-round pick. For Washington, they'd be getting an upgrade at the center spot. Thomas Bryant has never been a very good defender, so Aldridge's average defense won't be making them any worse on that end. Aldridge would be a nice upgrade on the offensive end for this team though. He did average 19 a game last season, and he'd be a great pick and roll or pick and pop partner with Westbrook and Beal. Whiteside would also be a solid backup center for this team, bringing inside scoring, rebounding, and some rim protection too. Similar to the DeRozan trade to the Nets, there's not a whole lot of risk in this trade for the Wizards. While Bryan is a solid young center, he'll probably be a fringe starter for most of his career. Acquiring Aldridge and Whiteside would make the Wizards better in the present, and they still have their last 2 lottery picks in Rui Hachimura and Deni Avdija for the future. If it doesn't work out and Washington misses out on the playoffs, all will be well since they still own their first-round pick in 2021, and Aldridge and Whiteside are both on expiring contracts. Number 5, James Harden. I don't think that you can make a trade video without talking about James Harden. At this point, we know that James Harden wants to be traded, and we know that in all likelihood the Rockets will move Harden before this year's trade deadline. The only question is where James Harden will end up. Because of his off-court antics, Harden has really hurt his reputation as well as his trade value. Since his trade value is pretty low, he's gonna have to increase it by continuing to play at the high level he's been playing at to start the season. But he'll likely have to do that for a few months because the truth is that Harden is a massive culture changer and teams are going to proceed with caution before trading for him. Ever since the Rockets paired up Mike D'Antoni with Harden, he's gotten used to doing whatever he wants on the basketball court. Yeah, before Mike D'Antoni got there, Harden was able to play off the ball, but Harden has become so accustomed to dominating the ball, taking control of possessions, and playing lots of iso ball. As talented as he is, most NBA fans would agree that that style of basketball doesn't translate to winning championships. Can Harden change his style of play back to what it was before D'Antoni came to Houston? Yeah, maybe he can, but there's also a good chance that he remains the same. Because of this, we'll probably have to wait until February or March before we see Harden getting moved. While there are a lot of interesting landing spots for Harden, I think he'll inevitably be traded to Philadelphia for Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, Mike Scott, and 3 first-rounders. For Houston, you get some much-needed draft picks, a solid vet in Mike Scott, a nice 3-and-D prospect in Thybulle, and a young star in Ben Simmons. Simmons' fit may not be the best with John Wall, but Houston will make do with it considering that Simmons has superstar potential. For the 76ers, they'd be pairing Embiid with a guard that complements him much better than Simmons did on the offensive end. Harden and Embiid would be a great pick-and-roll tandem, and Harden's shooting ability would allow for Embiid to play in the post more often. In my opinion, Harden would get this team to at least the Eastern Conference Finals with the potential to make the finals and even compete for a championship. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the trades I came up with. Were they good? Were they bad? Let me know what you thought, and also comment down below any other players that you think are going to get traded this season. Anyways, that's all for me, and I'm out.